What if everything you've ever thought about justice was just an illusion? What if the courtroom, the police, the government, and even the news were only shadows on the wall? Distractions from the real battlefield where justice is won or lost. Plato believed that the true location of justice is not out there, in the systems we create, but deep within your own soul. And unless you face this truth, you will never be truly free. In a world obsessed with pointing fingers, blaming institutions, and demanding reforms, Plato offers a revolutionary perspective. Justice isn't a political event, it's a personal one. The Republic, one of his most profound works, is not just a blueprint for a perfect city. It is a mirror held up to your own life. The city, Plato says, is simply the soul written in capital letters. If the soul is disordered, so too will be any society it builds. This means that justice is not something you vote for, protest about, or legislate into being. It's something you become. Imagine a man who marches in every rally, who campaigns for the oppressed, who shouts about justice louder than anyone else. But inside, he is a tyrant to himself, full of rage, jealousy, cowardice, and confusion. Is this man just? According to Plato, no, because justice is not simply about external actions, but about the inner harmony of the soul. When your reason rules over your desires and emotions, when each part of your being does what it is meant to do, that is where justice begins. This is not an easy truth. It is much easier to change a law than to master your own mind. It is far simpler to condemn a politician than to confront your own hypocrisy. But if you care about justice, if you truly want to change the world, Plato insists that you must start with yourself. Not tomorrow, not after the next election, now. In his allegory of the soul, Plato divides the human psyche into three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Reason seeks truth and wisdom. Spirit craves honor and recognition. Appetite yearns for pleasure, comfort, and survival. When these parts are in conflict, you experience inner war. But when each one fulfills its proper role under the guidance of reason, the soul becomes just. The result is not only peace, but power. The power to live with purpose, to lead wisely, and to resist manipulation from the outside world. Justice, then, is inner order. It is alignment. It is when your actions are not dictated by cravings or fears, but by clarity and truth. A just person does not steal, not because they fear punishment, but because their soul is too harmonious to desire what isn't theirs. A just leader does not abuse power, not because of public scrutiny, but because their reason would never allow their lower instincts to dominate. In Plato's vision, true justice produces integrity, and from integrity flows everything else worth having. But here's the painful part. Most people never become just. Why? Because they don't want to rule themselves. They want freedom without discipline, pleasure without limits, opinions without understanding. They confuse chaos for liberty. They mistake emotion for truth. And so they fall into injustice, not because they are evil, but because they are divided. Within, they are ruled by appetite, by spirit, by whatever is loudest at the moment. This is the recipe not only for personal suffering, but for the collapse of nations. Plato warns us, when individuals abandon justice within, society reflects that loss. Tyrants rise not from nowhere, but from the soil of collective self-abandonment. If enough people let their souls fall into disorder, the city will follow. Injustice spreads outward from the inside. Corrupt leaders are symptoms, not causes. They are mirrors, not monsters. This is the terrifying power of inner neglect. It shapes the world around you. So if you find yourself angry at the system, overwhelmed by the lies in politics, disgusted by corruption, ask first, is your own soul in order? Are you led by reason, or by the emotions that feed the very chaos you hate? This is not a guilt trip. It is a call to courage, because in a world addicted to blame, it takes rare strength to look inward, but only there will you find the source of justice. Plato is not calling you to withdraw from the world, but to prepare yourself for it. Just as an athlete must train before competing, the soul must be disciplined before entering the arena of society. You can't fight for justice on the outside if you are at war with yourself. You can't speak truth to power if your own desires are your master. The greatest resistance to evil begins not in protest, but in purification. This is why, in Plato's Republic, the just person is compared to a well-governed city. Their reason acts as the wise ruler, guiding decisions with knowledge. Their spirit acts as the soldier, defending what is right and noble. Their appetites act as the workers, satisfying needs but never ruling. When these roles are respected, the person becomes unified. And unity is strength. Unity is peace. Unity is justice. But in today's culture, the soul is often inverted. Appetite is king. Desire is God. The market, the media, and even our education glorify consumption, gratification, and performance. People no longer ask what is true or good. They ask what feels right, what brings followers, what offers success. Reason becomes a slave, not a guide. And we wonder why injustice reigns. It reigns because we crowned appetite the ruler of the soul. Plato would tell you, reverse the throne, dethrone the tyrant within. Let reason, your highest nature, lead again. This will not be easy. It may cost you comfort, popularity, even relationships, but it will give you something far greater, inner freedom. And from that freedom, you can begin to build a just world. This is the sacred rebellion of the philosopher, not against society but against the confusion within, not with weapons, but with wisdom, not for revenge, but for order. Justice, to Plato, is not a utopian dream. It is the architecture of the soul, and every act of integrity, every thought brought under truth, every desire reined in by reason is a stone laid in the temple of a just life. You do not need permission to begin this work. You do not need credentials. You do not need perfect circumstances. You simply need to turn inward, to face your own divisions, and to begin the great task of self-mastery. No system can stop you. No government can grant it. No injustice can take it away. The path to justice is always open because it begins with you. This is the forgotten message of Plato. This is the truth hidden beneath politics, ideology, and noise. You were not born to be a victim of injustice. You were born to become justice itself, not a symbol, not a slogan, but a soul in order, a life of balance, a mind ruled by truth, a heart committed to what is right, not because of fear, but because of who you are. And once you become just, you carry something more powerful than any weapon or law. You carry the presence of justice into every room, every conversation, every decision. You change the world by how you live, silently, steadily, and with integrity. Others may not understand it. Some may mock it, but deep down they will feel it because true justice radiates. It cannot be faked. It cannot be bought. It must be lived. And that life, Plato would say, is the only life truly worth living. What happens to a soul when it loses its center? What happens to a person who abandons the pursuit of inner order in favor of external approval, distraction, and indulgence? Plato believed that when reason is no longer in control, the entire human being begins to collapse from within. And yet, modern life is designed to make that collapse feel normal, even desirable. We are taught to consume, not to contemplate. To react, not to reflect. To express, but not to examine. In this atmosphere, the soul is left to drift, with no compass, no anchor, and no ruler. Appetite becomes the new guide, seeking whatever feels good in the moment. But pleasure, unmoored from wisdom, quickly becomes a trap. What begins as freedom turns into addiction. What begins as choice becomes compulsion. And without even realizing it, the person becomes a slave to the very things they once believed would make them free. This is the tragedy Plato foresaw, not just in individuals, but in entire civilizations. When enough people lose the ability to govern themselves, democracy becomes a breeding ground for tyranny. Because when the soul is disordered, it projects that disorder onto society. The people no longer seek leaders who are wise, but those who reflect their own chaos back at them. Charisma replaces character, power replaces virtue, and justice disappears, not because it was defeated, but because it was forgotten. Plato warns us, if you do not learn to rule yourself, someone else will do it for you, and they will not have your best interests at heart. This is not a warning of paranoia, but of pattern. Look around. Notice how easily people surrender their autonomy for comfort, for validation, for safety. Notice how quickly they trade critical thinking for tribal identity. Notice how often they follow leaders not because they are just, but because they promise revenge or wealth or the destruction of some hated enemy. These are not signs of justice. They are symptoms of internal confusion. They are the cries of souls that have lost their ruler. To become just, then, is to reverse this descent. It is to reestablish reason as the governor of your being, not by denying your emotions or instincts, but by harmonizing them under truth. Imagine a chariot, Plato says, drawn by two horses, one noble, spirited, and obedient, the other wild, impulsive, and disobedient. Without a skilled driver, reason, the chariot crashes. But with reason firmly in control, the horses serve their purpose. The journey becomes possible. You are that chariot. Your desires and emotions are not your enemies. They are your power. But power without direction is destruction. Passion without wisdom leads to ruin. Justice is not the suppression of desire, but its proper placement under the light of reason. When that order is achieved, the soul becomes strong, serene, and centered. But here is the challenge. The world will not reward you for this path. It will not celebrate your inner discipline. It will not understand your silence, your restraint, your refusal to indulge every urge. It will call you repressed, boring, arrogant. But Plato would say, pay them no mind. They speak from disarray. They cannot recognize harmony because they have never felt it. Let your life speak for itself. Let your inner order radiate outward like a light in the fog. In time, it will be seen. True justice, Plato says, brings not only clarity but joy. A soul in order is not only powerful, it is happy, not the superficial happiness of pleasure, but the deep happiness of alignment. When what you know, what you feel, and what you do are no longer in conflict, peace arises. You no longer need to escape yourself. You no longer fear your thoughts. You become a friend to yourself, and that, Plato insists, is the foundation of justice, because injustice always begins with self-betrayal. The moment you act against what you know is right, even in small ways, you begin to fracture. And that fracture, if repeated, becomes habit. Soon you don't know who you are, what you believe, or why you act the way you do. You become a stranger to your own soul, and strangers cannot rule well. This is why Plato insists that the education of the soul must come before any political action. It is not enough to have opinions. It is not enough to be outraged. It is not enough to demand change. If you are not governed within, you cannot govern without. If you are not just within, your justice will be polluted by hidden motives, ego, and unresolved wounds. This is hard medicine. It humbles us, but it also empowers us, because it means that you don't have to wait for the world to get better before you begin. You don't have to rely on the system, on leaders, or on the approval of others. You can begin now, where you are, with what you have. The tools of inner justice are always within reach: silence, reflection, truthfulness, courage, humility. Use them, and do not be deceived by appearances. Some of the loudest voices for justice are internally broken. Some of the quietest lives are profoundly just. Do not measure integrity by popularity or wisdom by status. Plato reminds us that the truest things are often invisible, like the soul, like order, like justice itself. Trust the invisible, cultivate it, and let your life prove it. Every moment you choose honesty over deceit, discipline over indulgence, understanding over reaction, you restore justice to the world. not in theory, but in reality. Because the world is made of souls, and every just soul becomes a pillar of stability in the chaos. You may not change everything, but you will change something, and that something matters more than you know. Plato believed that the just soul is rare, but it is also radiant. Like a hidden spring in a dry land, it nourishes everything around it. You become a source, not because you try to fix others, but because you have fixed yourself. You become a reference point for those still lost, a quiet lighthouse in a storm of noise. And the more you live this way, the more you see how little control you actually need over the world. You stop craving power because you have found a deeper strength. You stop fearing injustice because you no longer participate in it. You stop seeking validation because you are already whole. This is the paradox of true justice. It makes you both powerful and peaceful, fierce and gentle, awake and at rest. But make no mistake, this path is not easy. You will face temptation, you will be misunderstood, you will stumble. But each time you return to the center, each time you choose order over chaos, you build something eternal. Not in stone, but in the soul. Not in laws, but in life. And when you do, Plato says, you become what the world desperately needs but rarely finds: a truly just person. Not a hero, not a saint, just someone whose life is in alignment with truth. And from that alignment flows everything else: wisdom, courage, temperance, and above all, justice. You do not need the world to change before you begin. The beginning is already within you. There is a kind of courage that no one sees, a quiet defiance that happens entirely within. It is the courage to say no to your own impulses, to resist the pull of your lower nature even when no one is watching. Plato believed that this invisible resistance was the foundation of all real justice, not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you trustworthy. And that trustworthiness is what allows harmony to emerge, not just within your own being, but in every relationship you touch. When you govern yourself with wisdom, you don't just improve your life, you raise the quality of the world around you. Your presence becomes more than neutral. It becomes stabilizing. Your clarity cuts through confusion. Your calm breaks cycles of reactivity. Your decisions, once guided by craving or fear, now follow a deeper law, one that aligns not with convenience, but with the good itself. But how do you know what that good is? Plato warned that one of the greatest dangers to the soul is confusion about what is truly good. People often mistake pleasure for good, or power, or approval. But these things are unstable. They change, they deceive. And if your sense of justice is based on them, your inner compass will never settle. You will constantly shift, adapting your ethics to fit your desires, instead of aligning your desires to a higher truth. This is why philosophy matters. For Plato, philosophy was not an academic exercise. It was a method of soul alignment. It asked you to examine your values, your assumptions, your habits of thought. It pushed you to define what you mean by words like justice, good, truth. Not just so you could debate, but so you could live rightly. For how can you live well if you don't know what well even means? This is where the real battle begins. Inside, against laziness, against illusion, against the seductive lie that you already know enough, that you are already wise. Plato said the first step toward justice is intellectual humility, admitting that you don't know, admitting that your soul is not yet ordered. Only then can you begin the work, and the work is slow. It means watching your thoughts, noticing your reactions, asking yourself difficult questions. Why did I speak that way? What was I really trying to get? Was I motivated by love or by fear? Was that decision just or just convenient? It is the discipline of constant inquiry. And through that inquiry, the soul begins to reconfigure itself. Chaos gives way to clarity, impulse gives way to principle, and slowly, the soul becomes a place of peace. But the world will test you, because the world is loud and justice is quiet. The world demands performance and justice demands truth. The world rewards appearances, but justice grows in silence. You will be tempted to pretend, to act wise rather than become wise. To quote Plato without living Plato. To display your virtue instead of embodying it. Don't fall into that trap. Plato reminds us that justice is not for show. It is not a social identity. It is not a costume to wear. It is the structure of your soul. And if that structure is not solid, no amount of performance will hold it up. Eventually, it will collapse under pressure. You must build from within, slowly, quietly, patiently, and let the results speak. But what are those results? A soul governed by justice becomes unshakable. Not perfect, not immune to pain, but steady. It knows what matters. It does not flinch when popularity fades. It does not bend when temptation whispers. It does not run when truth is costly. This kind of soul becomes rare, and when it appears, others recognize it. Even if they don't understand it, they feel its weight, its depth, its integrity. And in a world full of noise, that kind of presence is revolutionary. Imagine a society where most people live this way, not chasing power, but building inner order. Not demanding justice, but becoming just. Not waiting for the system to change, but changing the only system they can truly control, themselves. That was Plato's vision. He knew politics mattered. He knew institutions were important. But he also knew that no constitution, no law, no government could create justice in a society where souls were disordered. Because systems reflect souls. Leaders emerge from the people. Laws follow values. And when the people abandon reason, truth, and virtue, their politics will reflect that decay. The collapse is not top-down, it is inside-out. So Plato turned inward. He built a philosophy not just of governance, but of character. Not just of society, but of the soul. And in doing so, he offered us a blueprint, not for utopia, but for inner transformation. Justice that doesn't wait. A justice that doesn't depend. A justice that begins quietly in the smallest choices of your daily life. Do you pause before speaking? Do you question your own bias? Do you choose principle over convenience? Do you seek understanding instead of dominance? Do you listen to truth even when it's uncomfortable? These are not dramatic acts, but they are foundational. They create the structure of justice within you. And once that structure is built, it radiates outward, not with force, but with clarity, not with pride, but with presence. This is how justice begins, and this is why it begins with you. Plato would ask, what kind of person are you becoming? Not what do you believe or what are your opinions, but what does your soul look like? Is it ruled by reason? Is it aligned with the good? Is it becoming more ordered or more chaotic? These are the questions that matter. Because in the end, justice is not an external destination. It's an internal condition. It's not about winning debates or passing laws. It's about becoming someone whose very being reflects harmony, balance, and truth. That is the person the world needs. That is the person you can become. But it won't happen by accident. It will require effort, reflection, discipline. It will require turning down the volume of the world so you can hear the voice of reason within. It will require walking away from easy answers and sitting with hard questions. It will require the humility to admit that you're still learning and the courage to change. But if you do this, something extraordinary happens. You begin to trust yourself, not because you're always right, but because you're aligned with something deeper than your ego. You begin to carry peace, not as a mood, but as a structure. You begin to live in a way that invites others to do the same. And that, Plato believed, is the seed of all real change. It doesn't start with power. It doesn't start with protest. It doesn't start with reform. It starts with you choosing justice every day in the way you think, the way you speak, and the way you live. This is the work, and this is the way.